What's a small town dark secret you know? A few months ago there was a brief media kerfuffle in the local papers about someone breaking into a barn and attacking a pony. The account that made it to the papers tactfully omitted the fact that by attack they mean sexual assault. I learned this via a Facebook post shared by a classmate of mine who was friends with the owners of the horse. Edit. I'm not specifying exactly where this took place beyond somewhere in the East Midlands, England. In my town everyone thought that the elementary school music teacher was a pedophile. And a few years ago he got arrested. The school never told us what he got arrested for. But everyone knew what it was for. When I was in about 1st grade, the gym teacher was fired for molesting little girls. Some of the dads went and talked to him and scared him so bad he just disappeared, left all his stuff in his rental place and everything. I was middle-aged before I realized I should probably wonder whose land he's buried on. In my mother's ex-town there is a box full of automatic weapon and grenade buried somewhere. My grandfather had been a partisan in Italy during World War II, and at the end of the war his unit, instead of handing arms to the government forces, decided to hide them in case the Soviets had invaded the country. Now he is dead, and with him also the position of the box. The only other person besides me and my mother who knows about the box is the last men alive of his unit. Not mine. But my grandmother used to read coffee grinds for neighbors and friends, a form of fortune telling. She didn't believe in it, but it was a way to pass the time when she was a young mother back in the 50s 60s. One day she was reading a neighbor's grinds and said, "Oh, strange. It says you have a baby." The neighbor, who was a single female in the same conservative immigrant community as my grandmother, got skittish and said my grandmother was wrong. My grandmother was like, "Honey, no. Look at this cup. That's a baby symbol." And her neighbor starts sobbing. Turns out, she had gotten pregnant as an older teenager, been sent away to have a kid, and ended up giving the baby away to a married friend who lived across the country. And now my grandmother was the only one in town who knew. She stopped reading cups for years after that one. Way too awkward. A kebab shop in my hometown has an underground casino and sells food at the back door after closing hours. One of the local utility companies around me had some mysterious fires a while back. A bunch of paperwork and engineering plans went up in this fire. While the company was being investigated for mismanagement of funds and some of their newer facilities not being to the correct specs, it was ruled an accident, and they got an insurance payout. Our local cinema owner would cut out dirty scenes back when movies came on film rolls. For decades, all those butter jokes about Last Tango in Paris went over my head. We didn't catch on until Phoebe Cates' bare titties were conspicuously missing from our cut of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Truth is that he spliced them all together for one of the first obscene montages of his time. Brother and sister slept together. Everyone found out. The sister disappears for almost 10 years. Rumor was she'd killed herself out of embarrassment. Out of the blue she popped back up one day. Thinking, hoping, we'd all forgotten. Nobody forgot. But nobody mentions it either. At least she didn't come back with a 9-year-old too. I bet you were happy to see your sister after so long. Village next to my town. Stable is found with a dozen dead cows and more barely alive, standing in a literal meter of their own excrement. Neighbors claimed that they didn't notice anything, that the farmer didn't seem unusual. But I heard that they all knew that he was completely neglecting these animals, that he was an alcoholic, and that he threatened his neighbors to set their farms on fire if they dared to report anything. The surviving cows are okay now and were taken away from him. An extremely wealthy grandma had an affair with a pool boy. He called it quits and she accidentally ran him over and killed him. I don't remember if she actually caught a charge for it, but she didn't do any time. The family knows it was deliberate. Talks about it nonchalantly like, "Don't grandma off. She ran over the last man that crossed her." Edit. Small UK town. Man taken to hospital. Dies on arrival. Local news had announced that police were looking to speak to witnesses. Then announced police have upgraded it to a murder investigation. A few days later, some guys are arrested in connection to the case. A couple of months pass and they're sentenced to prison for murder. That's all that was made public. Heard through some friends who have family working at the local hospital that the victim had power drill inflicted injuries to every joint in his body. Gr Pevine says he'd sexually assaulted the underage daughter of one of the guys who then murdered him. There's an unexploded nuclear warhead, a hydrogen bomb, in a swamp 30 miles from here. And it's been here since the 1960s. Semicolon. Always a crazy rumor until the Dodd confirmed it in 2012. Apparently every now and again they come and look for it. It's in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Semicolon. Semicolon. My small town priest moved parishes to my church a few years ago. Seemed normal, yeah? Not until a few months ago when we found out he was sleeping with a married woman from the new parish he was at. The woman had kids that attend the school and her husband eventually found out. Called the church. And he was basically vanished. Found out recently he moved from his first parish because he was sleeping around with parishioners there as well. But they wanted to keep it low key, so they just switched his parish. At least he wasn't sleeping with her kids. Family was burned alive when a house caught fire. Rumor has it their daughter's boyfriend was jealous and set the house on fire. Neighbors heard their screams, but couldn't help. Popular pediatric orthodontist is in jail now for having sex with his high school young college-age employees in exchange for painkillers and nitrous. And when it came out, he admitted to being high while doing surgery most of the time. So this guy was taking turns on the nitrous tank while taking out my 4 impacted wisdom teeth. But he knows some people. So that story went away very quickly. I live in a super small town, see all the same people constantly. And back in the 80s there was a group of guys my mom went to high school with who were rumored to have killed this poor old man in town and robbed his house blind of drugs and nice belongings. They got away clean except for one of the idiots decided to in the sink. The police collected the sample, but at the time there wasn't the technology to find out who they belonged to. Well, around 10-15 years later they finally had the technology and they tested that sample. They found out who it belonged to and the guy ended up in prison after getting away with it for so long. My hometown has a famous drug addict, i.e. everyone knows who he is. He's lived there for 70 years and his crimes are town gossip. Most of the time it's small stuff. Stolen bikes, and once a canoe, that he just leaves somewhere. Living in a park when he doesn't feel like going home for a few days. Like that. He's mostly seen as a harmless, funny character. His brain is seriously damaged after hard drug use since his early teens. What is rarely mentioned is that when he still had a house he used to steal dogs and beat them to death in his basement. Growing up, our mayor had 2 teenage children and a baby. It was common knowledge the baby was the offspring of his 2 kids. It was just one of those things people didn't talk about. After he left office, his daughter gave birth to a kid by him as well. And no, I did not grow up in Alabama. Wait. The girl had a baby with both her brother and her dad? When I was in middle school, there were a series of arson fires near my very small Pennsylvania town. The last one burned up a mother and her daughter. The mother was considered promiscuous. The daughter was the kid that all the other kids made fun of. Needless to say, the little dumb teenagers responsible were never found. A kid in my grade tried to rob an old lady. I think she was 98 years old and living by herself. After school one day he went to her house and broke in through the back door. Apparently she was going to be robbed without a fight and had a gun with her. As he went to disarm her, the gun went off and broke a window. He got the gun away from her and strangled her to death. He started to panic and shoved her into a closet so no one would find her. A week or 2 later the neighbors called the police because something smelled horrible and the police arrived and found her body. I guess the kid went back and tried to make it easier to hide the body by cutting it up and placing the pieces all over the house. When the police finally recovered all the remains, the autopsy showed that she might have been Arped. The kid just got a life sentence with no chance for parole. Not exactly a secret, but it's still dark. A lady from my hometown married and killed Phil Hartman. Back in the 80s they'd closed down the old middle school in my town and built a new one fairly close to it. Because the building wasn't that run down, they'd let the Little League, grades 2-6, teams practice in the old school and leave big kids alone at the new school. I'm not really sure how, but a rumor started that there was a Satanist club underneath the gym. People claimed they could hear chanting and loud banging noises from under the floor and it freaked everyone TF out, so the school mostly stopped using it. I found out the truth recently from my friend's mom. Apparently some locals ran a swingers club down there and she knew because went once just to see what it was like. Not really a small town, Venice Beach, CA. Henry Hopper, Dennis Hopper's son, Arped's teenagers. It's known by everyone who knows him or of him. His friends look out for him and protect him when he's out partying and they cover for him as best they can. Some believe they take part and they're a ring. He's been accused many times. Many calls to the police. Been arrested. He brags about it when he's drunk and brags about how he can't be stopped. It's LA and he's a D-list celebrity, child of an A-lister. The law is no match for his legal team and bottomless trust fund. A guy jumped off a really tall building in my hometown. Ruled as suicide. But rumor has it that he was forced to jump. Or physically thrown off the building. Due to his dealings with organized crime. That's how mafia work. We have a scenic cliffside really close to town where a lot of dog walkers go. It has established paths and fences as well as a road running 10 meters away from the edge. It's a hotspot for suicide, but I only found out about it from a Coast Guard friend while she was drunk that they are always on the lookout for bodies at the foot. She said about 10 on average were found a year, which is massive for our small town. It was surreal. BC, I had lived there my whole life and none were ever reported or anything. There were Samaritan organizations that did patrols every now and then, but they were fairly quiet about it. Our small town's local mayor had Arped his 23-year-old daughter for years. Starting when she was 7 and ending when she was 23, and finally told someone. He somehow managed to win the next election and is still mayor. Edit. I should mention that some good did come out of the story. Once it became hot news around the town, she ended up moving to a new country to start her life over. She ended up meeting a super rich guy who is kind to her and takes care of her. She is now a stay-at-home mom and her man treats her to a lavish lifestyle. I wish her the best. High school boy killed his sister while driving drunk out on farm roads. He became, essentially, the town pariah. But wouldn't leave the area. Worked at the local grocery store as a bagger. Never did move up. Nobody ever acknowledged him other than to give him dirty looks. Even years later. I don't remember anyone ever actually discussing why everyone hated him. But we all seemed to know anyway. Even the newcomers. A girl in my graduating class of 23 kids had a ton of parties at her house. Her mother was only like 15 years older than us and she always also attended these parties. At one of these parties, 2 boys in my class attempted to woo the girl's mother. They ended up actually having a main-age tour with her mom. I moved away from that small town when I was a sophomore, but I will never forget that poor girl who had a mom that got tag-teamed by some high schoolers. Sorry guys. I meant main-age, a grave choice. My years of school French failed me. Also, there are a lot of people that have similar stories, I guess. This incident took place in a small town in Missouri. Full stop. People in my town want to build a statue of a dead man who is seen around town all the time waving at people. He's been doing it for decades. But in reality the guy is really poor and no one helps him with living expenses or basic health dental care. They're basically acting like he's already dead. And are trying to raise money to honor him instead of raising money to do something nice for him while he's still alive. I like that there are dozens of people asking if I'm talking about their town. I guess this kind of token I'm good for enjoying this person. but don't actually care about them is pretty common. Harkens back to the village idiot concept. A bit sad. This was in high school. A group of guys chased down some kid, held him down and stuck a DLDO up his ass. The group of kids got in some serious trouble. And that poor guy is forever known as the DLDO kid, as much as nobody will admit it. A guy from my grad year went missing about a year ago. There was a massive search in my small Western British Columbian town. People freaking out left, right and center. The whole shebang. It was a weird feeling. This guy was friends with a few really good friends of mine. Anyhow. So then somebody finds him driving nearby Edmonton. And it turns out he ran off because he knocked up a girl in my grad class. What was kinda tight was how his parents failed to mention to the police that some of his clothes and belongings were missing. So that's basically 90% of what people my age have been talking about. Edit. I really should have read the rest of the thread before I realized just how over my head I am. Edit 2. You're all delightful and I feel very validated. I live in Bad Neuenahr, Germany, and Rex Tillerson once stayed here for a G7 conference. He resided in a local hotel which was directly above a series of tunnels that were dug there before World War I in search of new geysers and well springs. My town is a therapeutic baths town. And people knew that you could basically move throughout the town undetected and they are not mapped anywhere. Since the plans got lost in a World War II bombing raid, I believe. So tunnels basically. In my small town, there's a former priest who had articles written about his abuses of children written about that were dealt with by the church and never handled by law enforcement. So he's not on any offender list. He lives really close to a school, too. Everyone knows. But he keeps to himself and is very old. Grocery store clerks have said he's very rude. Not much of a secret as it hit the news, but probably not known outside Nova Scotia. About 10 years ago a little girl went missing and her mother reported it, even going on the news asking for her daughter to return. A week or so later her body was found and the whole town mourned, leaving teddy bears where her body was found. It was discovered that the mother murdered her because she didn't want her new BF to leave her as he didn't want kids. I was living in a different province during the time, but when I came back that was all people were talking about. I remember the cover of the local paper having an article about it saying the girl pleaded with her mother to stop before she was smothered with a pillow. Edit. I just googled and she was actually strangled and the mom was back in court just last year. I was dating this girl from rural Maine. I mean really I'm rural. Western Maine near the Appalachian Trail. I'm hanging out with her family one summer shooting guns, shotgunning Thai beer, and sharing hunting stories. One of the guys there starts talking about how he likes to hunt hikers on the trail. He'll even take pot shots with his rifle. I'm up their campsites at night. That kind of. He also claimed he came across this older woman camping a bit off the trail. Uphead her. Made her write some fake note about how she starved. Then killed her. The other guys were laughing and backslapping him while I sat there drunk as and in total disbelief. I hope he was just bullshitting, but at the time I was glad I had a shotgun in my lap. Never hike alone in rural Maine. In my best Robert Stack voice update, I've contacted the Maine State Police and gave them all the info I had. They said they'd look into it. If anyone lives in Maine, keep an eye on the news and you might see something in the coming weeks. In 7th grade, a classmate got pregnant by her special needs stepbrother and then killed the baby once she had it at home. Rumor was that her stepmom did it, but either way, she got away with it. That the daughter of a former sheriff is the person who ran over and killed another girl. But her dad had it covered up. He was the actual sheriff when it happened. All because the other girl had been seeing the same guy she liked. I was researching my hometown's history for a project in middle school and discovered that there were various KKK meetings held behind my elementary school sometime in the 1900s. Edit. Down the street from the house I live in is a forest with a disused gravel road going into it. If you follow the road, there's an abandoned house inside the forest with all the furniture and stuff still inside. When I was a kid, That place was our secret fort. My friends and I used to go and play there all the time. Until my mom told me what that place actually was. See? Back during Vietnam. One of my mom's school friends lived there with her husband and 3 kids. A bunch of young guys, including her husband, ended up going to the war. Unfortunately, her husband was killed out there, grieving and without money or a job. The young woman killed her children and then herself. The place is owned by her mother now. Never ever went back to that place. One of our city council woman's kids are not her husband's. He has no idea. My parents lived next door to the family for years. They had 2 kids around the same age as my brother and I. They also had major marital problems but kept a good public facade. Husband was 30 years older than the wife. And had kids from a prior marriage. I guess one night, over way too much wine, councilwoman got some loose lips. She confessed to my mom that her husband didn't want kids. But she really wanted them. She didn't want to wait and get divorced married again. So she went to a sperm bank, picked a donor that physically matched her husband, and did artificial insemination. Twice. Got pregnant both times. Told her husband that her pill must have failed. And claimed she didn't realize until it was too late to get an abortion. At the time she told this to my mom. The kids were 21 and 19. My mom didn't really know what to do. So she kinda kept her mouth shut until she blabbed to me several years later. Smallish town, Canada. The town I live in has a rehab center. Not your basic alcohol or drug center. Center for priests who have been naughty. Small family Severett. My grandma told my grandpa to kill himself. He went out to the garage and closed the door. He started the car and died of asphyxiation. I'm told that she knew he was dying and did nothing. After he died, she inherited a ton of money and disowned us. Sometimes I see her and she pretends she doesn't know me. Kid of a politician was pistol whipped, then his body was burned out in the woods. There was a male cop in our town who got fired for having sex with a woman in his patrol car. The secret was, it wasn't a woman. It was a man. The only reason I know of it is because the former cop is my fiance's uncle. A kid I went to high school with took a kid up into the mountains and made him dig his own grave. My town's on the list from the movie Spotlight that they show at the end about priests who had been accused of sexual abuse. Edit. Also remember my mom told me same priest baptized my brother as a baby back in '87.